love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place.
Chapter 38, starting in verse 27, it came about at the time that she was giving birth. So we just skipped about 6 months, because the verse before was when she was 3 months pregnant, and now she's given birth. Time she was giving birth, that behold, there were twins in her womb. Moreover, it took place while she was giving birth. One put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But it came about as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. Then she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez. And afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. Why does that matter? Why are we even told about these twins? Okay, ordinarily I would agree with you, for firstborn matters, but we've seen in the genealogy of Christ that we've been following here, sometimes that doesn't hold true. Judah's a fourthborn, and he's the more significant of the 12. So, why are we even told about Perez and Zerah? Perez is significant, and it is in connection with Judah and the lineage of Christ. This is how Judah becomes the father of eventually David, is through this incident. This is why the Judah Tamar story matters to the story that we're following in Genesis. And the reason why these two being born matters is because these are the sons of Judah that actually produced the Christ. Not the first three, but from these twins. Perez is the one that becomes an ancestor that brings about David. We read about that in Matthew chapter 1, by the way. If you want to flip over there, we can read it real quick. Probably take us less time to read it than it'll take us to flip over there. Matthew chapter 1, starting around verse 3 or so, I think. And Judah the father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Solomon, and Solomon the father of Boaz. By the way, he's the one we had mentioned in the lesson Sunday morning, who also became part of this lineage through the same Levirate custom. Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse. Might be worth noting that Rahab was not just a harlot, but a Gentile. She wasn't even a Jew. She became a proselyte after the Jericho incident, but there is a Gentile. There's actually two Gentiles in the lineage of David and subsequently Christ. There's also two other, I think, things that are highlighted in this event. One of them, not as important, well, I ain't going to say not as important as the other one, not as significant as the other, not as strong as the other one, I guess is the way I'll say it. So obviously the morals surrounding these two boys' birth, not good. Yet they still retain their position in the lineage of Christ. Well, we've already seen, and that's part of what we talked about Sunday morning, again in that sermon, that the three older brothers of Judah were disqualified because of their behavior, their character, and their unwillingness to repent. Judah was chosen because he did repent, Now, these two boys, did they inherit the sin of their conception? No. And so this kind of highlights the fact that there is not any inherited iniquity that comes from the actions of the parents and gets handed down to the children. But more importantly, it shows that God has the ability to work through all kind of complicated situations that the behavior of men create. The behavior of Judah and Tamar did not derail God's plan, nor make it impossible for him to work. He can still fulfill his purposes. Who can stay the hand of God? That's the way it's presented in another place. Nothing I do is going to keep God from being able to accomplish his purposes. But what I do might help accomplish those purposes. And by the way, that's the transition that's fixing to take place. We're going to talk about Joseph, who consistently behaved in a manner that he helped accomplish the providence of God. And those are the two choices that we have in life. We're not going to stop God from doing what God has planned. We're not going to change the outcome. I can't do something that's so terrible that somehow or another Satan's going to end up winning and Christ is going to lose. Neither can the collective of mankind on the earth. Even if we turn to be as wicked as the generation of Noah, or worse, God will still accomplish his purposes. But I can't act so as to be used by him and be effective for bringing about the things that he has planned. Which one is the better position to be in? Yeah, being on his side and walking with him. That's the much better position to be in. And so we want to keep that in mind as we move forward. Okay, so we're going to get into a discussion of Joseph. Joseph is not in the lineage of Jesus, but he plays a very important role in making it happen. Because what would have happened without Joseph? There would have been a horrible famine that people were not prepared for, and lots of people would have died. Now, I'm going to stand with Abraham and say, if Judah had died, or if Judah's sons had died, if God needed to raise them from the dead in order to accomplish his purposes, he would have done so. But that was a moot point because of Joseph. And if you want to find somebody to emulate in the Old Testament, Joseph is a good choice. Because not only did he do good things, but he consistently did good things, and he consistently made good choices. Was he perfect? Trick question. I'll warn you. Was Joseph perfect? He was perfect in the sense that we can be perfected in our faith. He was not perfect in the sense that people use that term to mean flawless or without sin. And yet, we just see lots of good stuff about Joseph. However, how was he received? What did his brothers think about Joseph? We're fixing to get into Joseph in Potiphar's house. How did Joseph get to Potiphar's house? He was sold into slavery. Who sold him into slavery? That's a whole new level of sibling rivalry. They were jealous. They were angry. They were lots of things. They hated him. There's just no two ways about it. They hated him. And not just because his father loved him more. That was kind of the root of the jealousy part of it. But what added to that was what? He has these dreams, more than one. And these dreams suggest what?
He was better than, or he was literally all over his.
I like the way you said that first time, actually.
Oh,
because that's the way the brothers took it. That the dreams were suggesting, or that at least his interpretation of the dream was suggesting that he was better than them, which is not at all what the dream signified. And yes, there's an aspect in which he ruled over them, and we're going to see that play out, but really, that was all providence and provision. And instead of being filled with hate because of those things, they should have been grateful. But did they have enough information to be grateful?
Kind of seems like, you have to do his flawless. Maybe that was one of those flaws, especially because he's young at that point. Maybe he's presenting that dream as, I'm arrogant and I am better than you. It doesn't specifically say that, but their reaction and, and then his later life, where maybe he learned a lesson through that.
Yeah.
Kind of
Even his father got kind of frustrated with him. And the Bible's clear about this point. His father preferred him. And he got frustrated with him. Now, maybe he was just frustrated because it was causing problem with the other kids, and that just meant more problems for him. But at any rate, this is some important material in terms of helping us understand how the providence of God works. Joseph had an advantage over, I'll say, a lot of us, in that Joseph was given these dreams that gave him some insight into the role that he would play. Did it tell him everything? Did he even really know what they meant? Now, this is kind of important. He really didn't interpret those dreams, did he? He just told, this is what happened. I had this dream, and there were these 12 sheaves, and my sheaf was in the middle, and all the rest of the sheaves were around me, bowing down to my sheaf. And they assumed from that therefore each one of those other sheaves represented them, and they were bowing down to Joseph. Why would they bow down to the little brother? Why would that ever happen? In what world would that ever happen? Well, in God's world. But it didn't make any sense, and it wasn't explained to a detail and that's important as well. Because as we read through this, we know the end of this story. Joseph did not. So, as Joseph is sold into slavery, is that interpreted as, oh, this is just God putting me where I need to be? No. Why does Joseph think that he's in slavery? Because his brothers are bad guys. That's why. And in fact, we might interpret this let's just imagine for a moment that I do know the end of the story, and that I know that I'm going to be the ruler of Egypt one day, and I'm sold into slavery by my brothers. Do I think that that's the route that's going to get me to be the ruler in Egypt? No. And so the reason this matters is because at each step along this way, there are temptations and there are different things that present themselves to Joseph, choices he has to make. He doesn't know that everything is working out good. He doesn't know that his visions are coming to reality. In fact, at this point, maybe there are less visions and more dreams. He doesn't know. And yet he still chooses to do the right thing. And that is very important in recognizing the character of Joseph. And if Joseph can do it, guess what? So can I. I don't always do it. And I promise you, if I had been in his situation in Potiphar's house as a slave, and I had really messed something up and made a bad choice, I would have blamed it on my circumstances and not my character. You ever heard anybody do that? They do something really bad and they say, but you have to understand, this happened and so did this to me and this happened to me, and what was I supposed to do? As an excuse for bad behavior? Joseph doesn't use any of those excuses. And actually, we're going to see that some of the times that he makes the right choice, he suffers even more for making the right choice. That's another reality of life. No good deed goes unpunished. These sayings that we have are not made up out of whole cloth out of the air. They're usually made up out of some experience of reality. And that's one of them. Sometimes making the right choice makes things harder. In fact, making the right choice put Jesus on the cross. Making the right choices got Peter executed. But when he made the wrong choice, he escaped execution. You ever thought about that? On the night in which Jesus was betrayed, and they said, hey, you were one of them, and he denied him how many times? 3 times. Why did he deny him 3 times? He was scared. What was he scared of?
Death.
Yeah, if he was identified with him, then he might be killed with him. So deciding to lie and to deny the Lord very likely saved his life. And later on, at the end of his life, standing up for him and refusing to deny him ultimately cost him his life. So sometimes doing the wrong thing can get us out of something bad, and doing the right thing can make our circumstances even worse. What's the motivation for doing the right thing? Maybe, just maybe, you're the one that's being used to accomplish the providence of God.
Maybe we reward you if you keep doing everything right.
I can guarantee if you keep doing everything that God would have you to do, and you do it out of faith, that you will be rewarded by God at the proper time. He'll exalt you at the proper time. You may suffer loss after loss after loss after loss after loss, but when he's ready to exalt you, you'll be exalted. That is part of the story of Joseph. And it's something that we can learn from. Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, so he became... Did Joseph know the Lord was with him? Just think about that. We'll come back to that question if I remember to raise it again. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. How can you be a successful man when you're a slave?
Is that speaking in the future?
What defines success? There's something that we have to think about. Let's keep reading about Joseph. He's a successful man. What made Joseph successful? His master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. I'm going to stop right there and tell you, I'm not real convinced that Potiphar went, hey, this is the working of the Hebrew God. What it means is that Potiphar realized that things that Joseph did usually worked out well. And if you have a slave and the things that they do usually work out well, what do? You take advantage of that. You give them more responsibility so that the things that are working out for them are working out in your best interest, which is exactly what this is describing. Joseph found favor in his sight, became his personal servant, and he made him overseer of his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. And it came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Seems like an odd statement to make in the middle of all this. What does that have to do with anything? It is a transition. We are making a transition. First off, we're establishing the trust that Potiphar developed with Joseph. When he bought Joseph, he didn't know Joseph from Adam. As Joseph worked and served, he went, this purchase is working out nicely. Let me give him more responsibility, until eventually he had brought him all the way up to, he was like second in command in the household. And he trusted him with everything. That tells you something about the character of Joseph, by the way. In fact, he trusts him so much that he's not afraid to leave home. And that's the point of the transition. We need to know something about his appearance because of the next circumstance that is going to be presented to us. All right. It came about that after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he's put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm not sure that Potiphar had ever bothered to go by Joseph and say, by the way, you can do anything you want to in my house, except keep your hands off my wife. So where is Joseph getting this from? Joseph had morals, unlike some other people we've read about recently, like Onan and Judah. Joseph has some morals and says, look, you're married to somebody, you don't belong to me. Notice where he goes with this. How then could I do this great evil and sin against Potiphar? Sin against God. You know, he could have said, well, this is some godless Egyptian that worships Ra, not the God of heaven. He doesn't deserve any respect. And yet he realizes that even a sin against this godless Egyptian is a sin against God. There's something for us to learn. That someone else's behavior and choices have nothing to do with the way that I treat them or the respect that I give them. Again, we get a juxtaposition here. Tamar, your daughter-in-law is guilty of immorality. Burn her. Before he even looks into it and tries to find out whether it's true.
But that's kind of cruel back then, because it takes two,
It does.
and they'd get after the woman, but they wouldn't chase the man.
Well, that ain't just back then.
Yeah.
You have to see the measure of respect that he's showing someone that he could have justified in his mind. This is a guy who's enslaving me. This is a guy who does this. This is a guy who does this. He's an Egyptian soldier. He kills people for a living. He doesn't deserve any respect. Why do you think that there are people today in our country? Back just yesterday it happened, I forget where. I think LA. Not very far from where I was at last week. A bunch of people ran into a Nike store and just stole $12,000 worth of merchandise, picked it up, walked out the front door with it. What makes them think they have the right to do that?
It's all open, it's free.
Well, it's not really supposed to be free. There's price tags on all of it, and cash register sitting there. You're supposed to pay for it. Why do they think they're justified in going there and taking it?
They have no morals.
They feel like that the people that have it don't deserve it.
Ought to be.
So I don't have to respect them or respect the laws because the laws are unjust, and I can just do whatever I want to do. That is not the attitude of Joseph. And Joseph recognizes that his behavior toward Potiphar, his master, his owner, has to do with his relationship with God, first and foremost. There's lots of things that can go through people's heads. It came about as she spoke to Joseph day after day. Here's the next one. Well, you know what? I put it off and I put it, but it just to keep. She kept asking. I couldn't help but relent. Day after day that he did not listen to her, to lie beside her or be with her. It happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there inside. And she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came in to me to lie with me," and I screamed. All right, none of that was true. But do you notice what she does there? He brought in a Hebrew among us. Who's she talking to? A bunch of other Egyptians. And she is using racism. Not a new trick. It's been going on for thousands of years. It came about when he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. No good deed goes unpunished. She spoke to him with these words, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make sport of me, and it happened as I raised my voice and screamed that he left his garment beside me and fled outside." It came about when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," that his anger burned. By the way, she was smart and cagey as well, because she had talked about this to everyone else enough to know that if her husband should ask anyone, they would have heard the same story, which would have been, and it wouldn't have been anything, but it would have been perceived as confirmation. Joseph's master took him and put him into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the jail. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended. The Lord was with Joseph? He got put in jail for something he didn't do. Is that how we would interpret that? If when you were leaving here tonight, 3 squad cars squealed up, jumped out, put handcuffs on you, hauled you down to the jail, put you in jail, charged you with something you hadn't done, and you were sitting there in jail, would you say, "Hey, the Lord's with me"? So, I mean, we just need to put ourselves in his shoes and understand.
The Lord was with Joseph, right? So it's like, despite what just happened, the Lord was with Joseph anyway. You know?
Okay. I'm okay with any of that. And what that means is when something bad happens in my life, that doesn't mean that I've been abandoned by God. Something bad has just happened to Joseph. Now, for the third time. Okay, the first bad thing was his brother sold him to the Ishmaelites. The second bad thing was the Ishmaelites sold him to an Egyptian. The third bad thing now is that he's being falsely accused of something he didn't do and now put in jail for it. And God is still with him. He hasn't been abandoned. That doesn't mean that you've been abandoned by God. And yet that is the way most people interpret things in their life. Bad things happen and they go, I'm forsaken. In fact, again, we have these kinds of language tropes. We talk about places being God-forsaken, or people being God-forsaken. What is those? What's that describe? That trope, God-forsaken. It's a bad place. Bad things happen there. Nothing good is working out. Well, there's some bad things going on here, but not forsaken by God. God's with him. The Lord was with him and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. So his circumstances keep getting worse and worse, but he has favor with the people who have authority over him. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail. What do we call those guys? Trustees, which means what? Why we call them trustees? Exactly. So that's exactly what's going on here. The chief jailer puts him in charge of the jail because he trusts him. That sounds familiar. Almost like exactly what happened in Potiphar's house. Almost. And it might happen again. Chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. So he's got the complete trust of the jailer. It came about after these things that the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. What happens when you offend the king? Luckily, they didn't get yet. They went to jail. And who is in jail? Joseph. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, so he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail. The captain of the bodyguard. Wait a minute. Who was the captain of the bodyguard? What was Potiphar's job? The captain of the bodyguard. So this is Potiphar's jail, which makes a lot of sense because it's where Joseph is. Put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned, and the captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them. So even when he's in jail, you notice that Potiphar still has some confidence in Joseph. Isn't that interesting? Not enough to get him out of jail. The cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt who were confined in jail both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with his own interpretation. And when Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. And so there's something about their countenances changed. You can tell that they are worried. And so he asked them, verse 7, why are your faces so sad today? They said to him, there's something interesting as well. Okay, I'm a prisoner in jail. To the guy I'm enslaved to. And I'm looking at the other prisoners going, why are you sad? What can I do to help you? Something else about Joseph's character as well, isn't there? Nothing else, he was an optimist. I might be the one that's sitting there dejected, have to have somebody come up to me going, what's wrong? Well, let me tell you what's wrong. My brother sold me into slavery. I came here, I get falsely accused, I'm in jail now. But no, he's wanting to help people. Why are your faces so sad today? They said to him, we've had a dream and there is no one to interpret it. Joseph said, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. By the way, that answers the question, did Joseph know God was with him? So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches, and it was budding. Its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup and put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, now notice that he didn't say in, he says within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh to get me out of this house. I don't think that's a big ask. He's like, okay, let me tell you what's going to happen. What's going to happen is within 3 days, you're going to be back in your old position, and you're going to be with Pharaoh every day. Would you please tell Pharaoh that I'm sitting here in jail and ask him to get me out? I was, in fact, kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews. And even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon. That's the first time he even recounts his story to anyone. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, I'm likely to be like the chief baker, probably keep my dream to myself, but I hear the other one and go, oh, it's good news. Well, maybe I do want to find out what it means. He says, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And the top basket, there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days, and within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Wow. Not nearly as favorable. And by the way, the birds eating the bread out of the basket on his head, I don't know where he got the birds eating the flesh off his body from that, but what he said. Therefore it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all of his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants, and he restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Here's just another thing, another layer of reasons for Joseph to conclude that he has been forgotten by God or rejected by God or something, because now he's been sold into slavery by his brothers. He's been sold to Potiphar. He's been falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and ended up in jail. He has now helped someone and simply asked, tell Pharaoh about it. And now he's still sitting in jail while the person who's back in Pharaoh's house forgets him. So does Joseph curse God and die? By the way, where did I get that line from? Curse God and die. Job's wife. Bad stuff was happening to Job. She said, you ought to just curse God and die. Bad stuff's happening to Joseph, but he doesn't curse God and die. What's he do? He just keeps doing what he believes is the right thing to do. And as long as he is doing what God would have him to do, what are we being told all the while? No matter how bad the circumstances, God is with him. Even when you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and you cast into the furnace, God's with you. When you're Daniel and you cast into the lions, and by the way, Daniel spent, 80 years in captivity, away from home? God ever forsake him? Was Jesus forsaken by God? I mean, he died on the cross after all. It looked like it. That's the point of Psalm 22. It's why he quoted Psalm 22 while he was on the cross. But if you read that whole psalm, you find out that in fact he wasn't forsaken by God. And 3 days later, the tomb was empty because he wasn't forsaken by God. We need to learn. And we need to learn that sometimes, even in bad circumstances, we can still do things that serve the interest of God. And God will never, ever forsake us. Isn't that what Jesus promised? I will never leave you or forsake you. Do we really believe that? That's the question. Got to stop. The Lord wills, we'll pick up. But I'm trying to count. The 29th. Next week will be the 29th, right? So we'll have one more class before December. So we will pick up November the 29th with, what verse did we say? It's chapter 41 and just verse 1. Look at that. I got all the way from chapter 38, 27 to chapter 41. Yay me.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory.